Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Smart Park podcast by Aquatic Development Group. I'm your host, Julie Klein, and today we're diving into a topic that truly shapes the success of any water park project, the design. When you think about water park design, it's easy to picture the big, the bold attractions, but smart design is so much more than that. It's about creating spaces that guests love, operations teams that can run efficiently, and owners that profit for years to come. Joining me today is Ryan G. Snyder, ADG's Director of Planning and Product Development, and one of my buddies, who has spent many years perfecting the art and science of smart placemaking. By the end of today's conversation, you'll see how good design isn't just about creating pretty pictures, it's about driving profit, guest satisfaction, and repeat business. Welcome in, Ryan.
Well, thank you for having me, Julie.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you. So starting off strong, let's start with an easy question. Easy is subjective. When starting a water park project, why is design the most critical early step? And how does it shape long-term success?
So good design can actually result in positive effects, not only for the guest experience, but also the operational success of the property for decades after the initial early moves were made in the project. But good design doesn't necessarily need to be the big move, right? It doesn't have to be some huge, artful type of event that happens within the planning process. It can be about the small pieces. And then each of those individual small, positive decisions that are made during a thoughtful planning process can end up actually creating, as a collective, smart placemaking, which is really what the goal is of Aquatic Development Group and in other groups out there that are working on providing the best experience and the best ROI for their clients.
So let's dive a little bit deeper into what you mean by placemaking, right? I'm sure there's examples of good and bad, but when you start looking at designing from scratch, what are some examples of what good placemaking actually looks like?
Sure. One might think that the program is driving the entire design, but it's in some cases that is true. There is a relationship between the active and passive elements within the parkscape or the resort property that we're working with. However, it's beyond that. It's more about the flow from space to space, whether it's the user experience from entering upon the parking lot through the front gate, with every decision point making that they may be within that space that we've created for them, to be able to know what attraction they want to go to, where are they going to set up their home base for the day, what are the opportunities for getting food, retail, and other types of additive experiences that all add up to the ROI capability of that property.
It's funny, whenever I talk about design or we talk about it at Aquatic Development Group, I always feel like one of the pieces is, I have a 30-acre water park. I have a 5-acre water park. And what does that actually mean, right? And then you start looking at the placemaking, but does that include your parking? So all of those different things are things you must start from, right?
Absolutely. So that's a thing that we have seen in the industry that actually gets forgotten about is, those other elements of the program, like parking, right? Somebody says that they have 5 acres or they have 50 acres. What does that really mean? It comes down to the capacity within the park. How many people are arriving through rideshare versus their own vehicle, or is this a walk-to destination? Is it part of an existing resort property? So all those things affect the land usage, which in some cases it's not for pools, wave pools, rivers, surfing facilities, or even water slides. It is maybe necessary for their actual vehicle, having a home while they're there during the day. But often we look at parks from a different perspective. Being stroller friendly is really a key piece of the design layouts, right? It really doesn't matter if it's a municipal property, resort setting, or some megalopolis indoor or outdoor water park. If you can easily move yourself, a stroller, and your band of people around from the entry to all zones within that resort property space, then you've already won major positive points in the designing process.
It's hilarious that you give that as an example. I was just looking at a concept that another company had done, and Jim and I were going back and forth on it, and we're looking at the river, And the layout of it has all these attractions in the middle with a bridge, and there's stairs on the bridge. And his first comment, I'm like, oh, well, that's how you get over it. And his first comment was, yeah, how do you get a stroller? Boom, 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 down the stairs. You're already ruining a bit of that customer experience, right?
And not only are you maybe making something inaccessible, which can be solved through other types of, uncomfortable ramps and different things that sometimes get placed into a design late in the process because it wasn't part of the integral thinking. But you're also losing opportunities of those individuals wanting to stay within that property, wanting to return, being able to move freely throughout the property during their stay so that they are spending more time. They're able to do walk-bys of food venues, retail shops, Dippin' Dots, whatever it may be, and spending additional revenue within that space because it's easy to flow through the property.
Right. And comfortable. One example that it reminds me of, and I don't mean to dwell on kids and parents, but you think about water park, you are tailoring to a family.
Absolutely.
And, thinking about Highland Hills was with Water World, there was the mini harbor, and one of the design pieces was having that sidewall seating. Not only comfortable for the mom, but also that interactivity that you get to have with the child. So some of those little design features in rides and parks certainly make a difference.
Absolutely. And frankly, the success of being able to do that is actually starting during the planning process, right? It's okay to think like a kid. In fact, there's not enough that's happening within the industry today. I think our industry was born out of having fun and playing. Back in the early days of our industry, those early innovators were actually thinking about that because their family was an integral part of the creation of what we have today. Often, large design firms and whatnot, again, see the big move, the big picture, the artful, pretty picture and plan, and they've forgotten to think about a kid and what is the eye level of that child and their parents going to be during their experience. And thoughtful planning really should be about play and imagination. So play and imagination for me equals innovation and creativity. So once you've been able to do that, you can really start to think about other opportunities of what if we do this? What if we do that? And that's where, in the cases of ADG with the indoor water parks, we went vertical, right? We really started to layer spaces. What will it feel like when we have opportunities to do overlooks? The peekaboos, the find your way, the choose your adventure approach of moving in and around not only an indoor water park, but also extending that outwards to, say, a very large outdoor water park development. And being able to just allow that to be the impetus, the seed to be able to grow and dream without boundaries.
I love that. It's funny because the first example that came to my mind was Okana. And I remember walking on that upper mezzanine because you come from the resort into the indoor water park. You walk through that mezzanine and you're kind of exploring every corner. You don't really know where you're going to end up. I popped out and I was like, oh, there's an adult hot tub. That's kind of cool. And I think when you take the professional corporate hat off and you can start thinking like a child, it really opens your mind to what does this feel like from a kid's perspective?
Absolutely. Look, building codes and regulations are always a reality. And they will eventually, if not initially, be integrated into the design process. However, too many boundaries too early in the creative process can really create roadblocks to creative design. And I think that we really do try very hard on a daily basis to not fall prey to the regulation in the code books, right? I mean, that can just hamper designs, and you'll see that in properties throughout North America and even globally, that it's the same widget pool that's in one place here, there, and everywhere.
Kind of cookie cutter.
Yeah, absolutely. Just because, it was the easy thing to do. Taking an approach that isn't necessarily easy doesn't mean that it's actually a hard process. It's looking at it from a different perspective.
So when we're talking about indoor versus outdoor, on our last segment of the podcast, Ray kind of touched on capacity and how it differs between indoor and outdoor and working on levels. Can you just kind of briefly talk about how do you approach the two different verticals, indoor versus outdoor, when you're starting from the design process?
Sure, absolutely. So in a lot of ways, indoor and outdoor water parks are not different from each other. Indoor water park is confined by the physical walls of that indoor park, whereas an outdoor is confined by, let's call it the fence line. In an indoor, obviously, it's a much smaller area typically in comparison to, from a larger outdoor space. But a small resort space can be treated like an indoor water park. In fact, one can inform the other when we're doing design. So if we don't think about either one of those being within or not within a box and just focus on the actual the best design within that space that we can create, then it really, each one will have its own solution sets that'll be similar, but will be different in the fact that, you do have to interact with all the other systems, mechanical systems, egress, exiting points, and different things like that an indoor water park will have that traditionally an outdoor space is not going to have to deal with those factors.
Well, it's funny because I was actually just going to kind of pivot into operations and how you're designing for some of those not so flashy, pretty things. Obviously, when the concept goes out to the market, you're looking at all the pretty slides and pools. But how are you incorporating not just the visitor experience with those rides, but also looking at ways to maximize operational efficiency for the park operator?
Absolutely. So the example that we just talked about, indoor versus outdoor. In fact, beyond the fence line of where our guests are within, there still is a service corridor typically that's happening within the park, that where trash is coming from, where deliveries are going to be able to need to approach and be dropped off within the space. There are storage rooms. There are utility corridors around the space and within the park, whether it's an indoor or outdoor. So both of them actually have the same type of challenges. And even small little items that people see as afterthoughts, like trash cans, right? So we need to be able to bring refuse out of the park and hopefully in a way that is not disruptive to the daily use of the park, and be able to get to those areas efficiently, bring them behind scenes, and be able to just store those items on site until they're able to be removed. So it is the small elements as well as the large components like chemical deliveries, emergency vehicle access, and different things like that do matter in the design, whether it's an indoor or outdoor.
Or I was even thinking a good example would be like vegetation and plant life, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because you look at the Cartwright and that's real plants versus, I shouldn't say real, they're live plants versus fake. So even those kind of things, because obviously it's part of your maintenance if you're going to have to maintain the plant life.
Very much so. So natural lighting within an indoor water park will sometimes dictate live vegetation versus faux. However, in most cases, it really does come down to investment dollars. Sometimes it's part of the theming. What is something that is more realistic to be able to maintain within that space long term. It's not just from opening day, but if we're talking 15, 20 years down the road, will a large pine tree be the right thing to put inside of an indoor water park, or should we think about doing that out of a synthetic solution instead of a live plant?
You talked about small little pieces like trash placement. What are the items in that design that really make a big difference, whether they're small or some of these larger components?
Yeah, so it can be furniture placement. It can just be enough space to be able to stop and be able to make a decision comfortably without clogging up the circulation zone in that area. It may be opportunities for photo ops, different things like that. So an unused corner may actually be a gold mine to a property, where it may be an ability for their brand to be extended outwards. Because as we all know, social media is a huge component and a driver of our industry. And creating those types of opportunities that are not just follies that are maybe too harshly planned, but are found opportunities for a family or a couple or friends to connect and take a picture together, or even be able to drive a photo pass within the resort facility, further increasing the ROI of that property, or all opportunities that seem small, but sometimes they're found. Other times it is actually created through a thoughtful plan.
That's excellent. I was just going to talk about sightline, and that kind of reminds me of your experience getting through the park. How do you look at things like maximizing and featuring elevation changes and things like that throughout the park? Your sightline, the elevation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we all know that the mouse with the big ears has really been the driver of these type of things, of creating an iconic feature in which brings you into a new zone, right? Whether it's the central castle to a park. It doesn't have to be that. It could be something small, like something with color. It could be a waterfall that's placed in an appropriate way that drives interest. It could be a themed element or an animal, or just a different types of pathway. So a pathway and the actual walking surface, a hardscape within a space, can change and be able to help be a reason to be able to drive somebody through a certain pathway to be able to get to discover a land or a zone within a park. So there's different ways of being able to get there without creating large, tall elements.
Right, like you have to climb 200 stairs to
No,
get to
absolutely not.
right.
But a vista can be created through 18 inches of vertical change. It could be, 5 feet, or maybe it is of a floor level or a mezzanine within a water park. Maybe you enter that water park, like the example you mentioned earlier, the O'Connell Resort in Oklahoma. You actually enter at the second level, and then you transition your way down into the water park. So you already automatically have this vista where you can really kind of take in what is the big picture of what I'm seeing, all the opportunities to do things and places to be within the park. However, when you transition downward, it is a discovery path. And as you move your way through that, you end up discovering, wow, there is this whole themed adventure river that was underneath my feet and I didn't even know
You
it.
didn't even know. Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. I was going to say too, when I think about ways to leverage the height differences at a park, we were just out at Good Surf, right? Not a water park, but a similar concept of how can you leverage that natural higher elevation for even things like spectator appeal?
So engaging our guests, whether they're actively participating in like a surfing attraction, as you mentioned, or they're there to support their people as they're doing the attraction, or even just there to have lunch or dinner or drinks, watching the event. Engagement of all the people who are engaged, all of our guests and different types of guests. Maybe it's grandma that with a stroller that's not going to be surfing, but if she's having a great time and she may be even the decision maker of why they're there, you know what I mean? She may be funding the trip. If she can have a great time and feel like she was engaged and wasn't left behind in any way, then the ability for repeat business is just going to increase.
Pivoting back, because I really love the phrase that you use, smart placemaking. Can you kind of give me some insight as to how you balance this smart decision making and planning, but also, the budget? Because at the end of the day, obviously getting a project financed, you have to be budget conscious or budget minded in the design. You can't design the water park to be a $30 million water park and then you go to build it and it's 60. It doesn't do anybody any good in that process. So how do you look at that from a planning perspective?
Well, capital costs are everything. It's one thing to have a big vision or have made big promises, by the developer or whoever had dreamed up the original idea. But the capital costs really do drive everything. So there are ways to control that. We did touch on utilities earlier, but this concept of hub creation, right, where we can create zones within, say, a large indoor water park or outdoor water park, or even within an indoor water park, we can create these hubs of activities that behind the scenes, it's a centralization of food and beverage areas, or it's a centralization of mechanical systems where we're bringing power, water, sewer, sanitary, everything into one area and making it efficient versus having 30 locations within the park. We may end up having 3 hubs. And so by shortening all those utility runs, that allows the project in general to be able to install utilities at a much lower capital cost investment. And also it reduces the amount of utilities that are in the ground, therefore reducing the future maintenance issues that potentially could happen. but also can be done in a way that are done smartly so that expansions are already pre-planned into the project, and so that we can set up opportunities for future growth off of existing hubs versus having to now create another set of electrical utility, water utility, or et cetera, later on down the road.
I love the tie-in here, by the way, between Smart Place Baking and Smart Park Podcast. Well, there's so much more I want to dive into, but I feel like we are running out of time. So we're going to create a part 2 of this episode so we can continue the conversation. Ryan, thank you so much. This has been a great first part of this conversation.
It was great being here, and I look forward to continuing our conversation.